I think Poland would be making a huge error to get itself drawn into this mess. I think it'd be a quagmire for Poland, and I don't think anything good for Poland would come from it.
I don't think that Russia's going to end this without taking Mykolaiv or without taking Odessa. But what can we expect to see come after the fall of the Donbass? And there's a whole bunch of things that could play out. Could mean that peace negotiations begin. Who knows? But do you think it's possible that they start going after, cities other than Mykolaiv and Odessa? Do you think it's possible they go to Transnistria? What do you think is going to happen after the fall of the Donbass?
I'm going to make my own assessment here. I think it depends a great deal on what Ukraine does. Now, if Ukraine does not negotiate, when I say negotiate, doesn't sit down and actually come up with serious proposals which address Russian concerns, and they're going to have to make many more concessions than they would have made if they followed through on the start of the negotiations in Istanbul. But unless Ukraine negotiates, the Russian military campaign will go on. Now, it will probably go on, I'm guessing, in something of the same style that we see, in other words, incrementally. And my own guess is, and this is purely based on what you're seeing Russian officials say, they seem to be talking a lot about a town called Zaporozhye, which is a very important town in southeastern Ukraine, bigger than some of the other cities that we've been talking about. I believe it's bigger than Mariupol. I'm not sure about this, but there's a very important factory there, the Motosic factory, which makes aircraft engines, helicopter engines, gas turbines, all kinds of things. It's one of the great jewels in Ukraine's industrial crown. So I think they will probably continue the war unless the Ukrainians sit down and talk. And they will probably start, I think, at Zaporozhye, and then after Zaporozhye is sorted, maybe Odessa, maybe push towards Odessa, maybe go north to Dnipro or Dnipropetrovsk, as the Russians still call it. The Russian general staff, the Russian political leadership don't share their plans with me, but I'm sure they've got those plans. And I don't think they will stop the war until Ukraine decides it's going to sit down and negotiate and come to terms. And of course, for Ukraine to do that, they have to get the West to agree. And that's the problem, because what the Russians, I think, are looking for is a solution to what for them has been the Ukrainian problem that will stick. It's difficult, I think, to convey to people who aren't familiar with Russian thinking, that for the Russians, Ukraine has been, for the last 12, 14 years, ever since the NATO summit in Budapest, where Ukraine was invited to join NATO, Ukraine has been for them the biggest single foreign policy problem by far. It's the one that they see as existential. It's the one they see as the most threatening. It's the one that's wrecked their relations with the West. So they are looking at a solution that will be comprehensive and complete and will enable the Russians, to move on from this affair in Ukraine. And that will mean that they want a solution that obviously the Ukrainians accept and which gives the Russians the kind of security guarantees in Ukraine that they want. The country won't join NATO, that it won't develop nuclear weapons, that it will deal with all these people in Ukraine with these very hardline ideologies. And I know some people dispute the fact that they exist. They most emphatically do exist. And in Russia, they are seen as a very real threat, and which also provides protections for people who continue to identify with Russia in some form within Ukraine itself. So Donbass clearly is going to become independent. Kherson region, Zaporozhye region, they are going to become independent as well, because that's important to link up with Crimea. But if Ukraine waits too long, more regions as well The Russians will want more regions. They'll still want those guarantees. They'll still want all of those things. And eventually, if Ukraine still won't negotiate and the Western powers still don't negotiate, then I suspect that we will get to a point when the Russians are no longer interested in negotiations, but will simply dictate terms. And that may be dictate terms to a Ukraine that is so defeated that it has no, it's almost reduced, if you like, to its component parts, and every part is controlled to a greater or lesser degree by the Russians in one form or another. Or it could be that there's some other arrangement that the Russians have in mind, which I'm not even going to try and guess about. But I think that's where we're going. I think it's going to be drawn out because the Russians still want that deal. But if they don't get that deal, they will press on with their campaign until their objectives are realized. And let's be very clear, that's what they themselves are saying. And one of the big mistakes people are making when they look about Russian objectives is I think they don't listen to the Russians. And they don't listen when the Russians say that Ukraine for them is a red line and an existential issue, and that they were serious about the Minsk agreement and they were serious about those things. And I'm worried that people are perhaps not listening enough to what the Russians are saying now. What they're saying is that the campaign will not stop, the military campaign will not stop until all its objectives are achieved.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but do you guys think that Putin on a domestic front, that he will be able to take a deal to the Russian people without including Odessa? Well, I mean, that's the question that runs through my head. I can understand not including Kiev. Kiev doesn't have much significance outside of just being an administrative center. Obviously, I don't think the Russians want long term to deal with the West, Lviv and that area. But to me, I look at the south and I look at perhaps Dnipro, Kharkiv, and specifically Odessa, and I just think to myself, the Russians. I mean, no one ever listens to what the Russians are saying, like the Russian people. My sense, and from the people that I know and the people that I talk to, they feel like they've got this. Yeah, they know they're winning. They know they're winning on the economic side of things in a big way. They know they're winning on the ground, and they also know that the West they've thrown everything at the Russians. They've thrown everything. They have nothing else to negotiate with. That's why you see the Biden White House, trying to figure out ways to gain leverage. We'll send these weapons and those weapons, and we'll put these sanctions down. Now they're trying to figure out a way. How do we gain some leverage at the negotiating table? Because they've thrown everything out there. That shock and awe, they threw it all out there, and the Russians absorbed it. And so I'm thinking to myself, number one, why do the Russians have to negotiate at this point? Because there's nothing that the West can offer them anymore. Zero. There's nothing they can give them. And the second thing, Jackson Alexandris, do you think they have the political capital? Does Putin, is he able to go to the Russian people and say, okay, Zelensky, by some miracle, has decided to sit down and concede that we're going to get all the territory that we have up to Kherson? Yeah. I mean, I just think like the Russian people, they're going to say, what? Yes. You're not going to take the historical town of Odessa. Yes. You're not going to create that land bridge all the way to Transnistria. I mean, I don't know. That's what. No,
Alex makes an absolutely excellent point. Can I make two quick observations? And that is, the first is that Western policymakers, and not just Western policymakers, Western commentators, Western historians, I mean, I've read a huge amount of Russian history, always have a difficulty understanding that there is such a thing as Russian public opinion. There absolutely is Russian public opinion. Yeah. They always imagine, that everything is decided in the Kremlin, and that the Kremlin can do basically whatever it wants. That, if Putin wants to advance to Odessa, well, the Russian army will salute and they'll march all the way to Odessa. And if he decides that they won't take Odessa, well, everybody in Russia will be happy and they'll just go about their lives and nobody will stir or say anything. That could not be more wrong. There was public opinion in Russia in Soviet times, in Tsarist times, and most emphatically there is today. And of course, in today's Russia, with a more open, much more open political system that we've had in previous eras, no Russian leader, certainly not Putin, can afford to disregard the feelings of his people on this issue. And Alex is absolutely right to focus on Odessa. Now, I think Kiev actually does mean more to the Russians than perhaps Alex acknowledges. I mean, it is the mother of all Russian cities. If you go back to Russian prehistory, it was where, Prince Vladimir, established the Rurik dynasty, established the Rus state, and adopted orthodoxy. So, I mean, these things do matter, and they do have a certain traction. But he's absolutely right that it cannot compare with Odessa for Russians. Odessa is a relatively modern city. It was built by Catherine the Great. She gave it its name, by the way, named after the Greek hero Odysseus. Catherine and her lover and General Potemkin were people who were very steeped in Greek classical literature, so they gave all of these places Greek names. They're not from the Greeks; they are from those two. So Sevastopol, not Kherson, but Sevastopol, Mariupol, all of these places, they all have Greek names, and it's nothing to do with Greeks. It's all to do with, as I said, Catherine's own proclivity. So she created Odessa. She set up Odessa, named it after Odysseus. It was the jewel in the crown of this region. It is a beautiful city. It's one of the most extraordinarily well-preserved, amazing Victorian cities. It has a famous opera house, comparable and designed by the same architect who built the opera house apparently in Dresden. So, it's a famous opera house. It's got tremendous literary associations. It's tremendous culture, tremendous literature. Some of you may have heard of Isaac Babel, the Russian writer. He came from there. He wrote about the gangsters of Odessa. And Odessa is also, to some extent, the Al Capone style Chicago of Russia. Which has its glamorous aspects too. And of course, we've also got musicians, poets. It was heroically defended during the Second World War. It is for the Russians an enormously symbolic and significant city. Mm-hmm. And if Putin comes along and he says to the Russian people, well, I've achieved all this in Ukraine, I've got Donbass, I've got Kherson region, I've got Zaporozhye, but I haven't got Odessa. I mean, a lot of people will be very, very angry. Yeah. And of course, never forget that in 2014, there was that terrible fire in the trade union building in Odessa when pro-Russian protesters were burnt alive. And of course, people in Russia remember that too. So it would be very difficult for him to sell. Now, as I said, I don't know what's in his mind. I don't know what they're talking to each other about in the Kremlin. But Alex's points are completely valid.
Yeah, Russia never forgets. And you're 100% right about the public opinion as well. Like it's even if you look at that guy 1420 on YouTube that does those videos, and he's like in major capital cities where you have a lot of people like that are presumably infected with this Western liberal ideology. They still are, for the most part, like very pro-Putin. Russia overall 91% approval of Putin right now. They're well behind the military operation, as they all dub it. One last thing, and feel free to answer it like as quickly as you want, that I thought of when we were going back and forth with this is Poland. What do we think about like Poland balkanizing Western Ukraine? Is that still a possibility? Because I feel like that was being like really discussed and Russia was making accusations. Now I'm not hearing so much about it.
Yes, I think that there might have been such a plan. I think that the Russians, Putin, made it very clear that he was dead against it. I mean, he made this speech at in St. Petersburg in which he talked about a lightning reaction if something like that happened. And I think that was a warning to Poland, but also a warning to Poland's allies, not to allow Poland to do this thing, that Russia will react. And I understand also that it didn't go down, these ideas about Poland getting drawn into Western Ukraine didn't go down well in Germany either, if only because potentially it would leave Poland as a territorially bigger country than Germany itself. And that's something that some Germans are still unhappy about. But anyway, I think all of that has been dialed down. I think that it was, I personally think, again, I don't know for a fact, but I personally think it was seriously considered, just as I think a couple of weeks previously, before that, there was serious thought given to stirring up something in Moldova, with the bombings in Transnistria. That probably came from Ukraine. But anyway, but those warnings were made. The Germans weren't happy. I gathered the Pentagon didn't like it at all. And for the moment, I think that project has been dropped, or perhaps not so much dropped as filed away. If we see a Ukrainian collapse, which is certainly possible, then I'm afraid, and I very much fear, that Poland may be tempted to do this thing. And in Poland's interests, and I have connections with Poland, which I'm not going to discuss, but which I feel emotional about. I think it'd be a tragic mistake. I think Poland would be making a huge error to get itself drawn into this mess. I think it'd be a quagmire for Poland, and I don't think anything good for Poland would come from it.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that if Poland does decide to get tempted and go in, which I agree with you, Alexander, it's kind of been put on the back burner for now, this plan. But if Poland does decide to make a move for whatever reason, I think they're going to be on their own. Mm-hmm. I don't think NATO or the US is going to have their back. So that's not going to be a good thing for Poland.
Thanks for watching that episode of The Dive. If you'd like to support independent journalism, be sure to subscribe and consider becoming a member on my Patreon using the link below.